Lucia Baumann, and let's begin our talk. And thank you all for coming.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming. I hope you're all right. And well, I want to begin by saying well done for coming here despite the football being on. I know some people probably will want to head off as soon as this is finished, or maybe not, but anyway, thank you for being here. So I'm going to talk about the problematic effects of praise on self-esteem, autonomy, and intrinsic motivation. So the content of this talk is extracted partly from my master's thesis that I completed last year in April 2020. And it also includes elements of what I've taken away from having attended the SHP School Health Practitioners Training with Michaela Glöckler, the former head of the medical section at the Goetheanum, as well as my ongoing work with the Circle of Care. And also, of course, my own experience of working with children for many years. Mainly in schools, in a school setting. I will start screen sharing so you can just have a little bit of a visual thing to look at as well. So the actual title of the dissertation was A Journey Towards a Process of Learning and Unlearning, Shaping and Being Shaped, the Effects of Rewards and Teacher Praise on Middle School Pupils in the Classroom Setting. And I just want to say briefly something about this title, about it saying learning and unlearning. So the unlearning is related to undoing or unlearning some of the ways in which we as adults behave and speak to children. The ways I mean can be categorized as behaviorist methods of dealing with children and their various behaviors. I will go into detail about what this entails in a moment. I just want to say that doing this is not easy, as we in many ways live in a society that's based on behaviorist principles. If you do something wrong, there's a punishment. You get a fine or points on your license, car driving license, or you go to prison. If you work, you earn money. If you follow certain rules and you're doing well, you are rewarded. You might get a bonus at work, you might win a prize, etc. Schools, mainstream schools in particular, are usually full of systems for sanctions as well as rewards. And in terms of my own work, I had the desire to further investigate best practice in classroom management skills, in particular, how to prevent disruptive behavior in a healthy way. I wanted to explore how I can implement my findings, in particular in relation to rewards and praise, and how that, and the findings are, I would say, relevant parenting or working with children or adults with learning difficulties, etc. Every teacher, carer, or parent, no matter which age group they work with or in which setting or country they teach or live in, are making use of praise and give rewards in one way or another. So the findings are relevant to anyone who has an interest in educating or bringing up children in a healthy, non-behaviorist way. Elements of this can also apply to the workplace, having to appraise or feedback or line manage, etc. So what do I mean by behaviorist methods? It includes things like raising your voice, disapproving looks, threatening with consequences. In school, it would be things like threats of missing break time, detention, putting a child's name on the board, various sort of 1, 2, 3 warning systems, sending pupils to another class, etc. at home with your own children. It could be things like shouting, yelling, being impatient, putting them on a naughty step, time out, and so on. So I'd like to invite you all to be on a journey with me this evening. It might be a journey of learning, but also unlearning, as in learning the deeper issues that lay behind the behaviorist approaches, learning new, healthier ways of dealing with behavioral issues, and unlearning some of the so ingrained methods we all use. I think it's sort of an ongoing journey over years. You might have heard the phrase, every behavior is a communication. I think it's worth pausing there for a moment and really take that in. Every behavior is a communication. Anything a child does is or should be telling me something. So hence the quote, when a flower doesn't grow, you fix the environment in which it grows, not the flower. So we have an opportunity to work on ourselves. We need to take responsibility and make sure the environment for the children is the best it can be. As adults, parents, carers, or teachers, we most likely use praise and or punishment, which are both in the category of behaviorist methods, as part of our work or dealings with children several times each day, as teachers, possibly even in every single lesson. So being aware of its effects and being able to use praise in a more conscious way will have a powerful impact on all children. Initially and instinctively, one might think that giving praise must be a positive, effective approach in the classroom or at home, and will encourage children to do more of what we think is the right thing to do, and will aid their progress and development. However, as a great number of researchers point out, this is not necessarily the case in all situations, and it is argued that giving praise can have negative, detrimental effects on children. I'm just going to mention a few names of people who looked and researched into this. Kohn, Brophy, Kohn, Dweck, Delahooke, among others. So I'm going to speak a little bit about a couple of them in a moment. Well, actually, straight away, the first one I'm going to mention is Carol Dweck. She's a widely read author at university, and she speaks in many different articles, research papers, books, and on YouTube, including TED Talks, about her research findings on the issues of how the wrong types of praise can have detrimental effects on the mindset of the current younger generation. So the following and other studies are what a lot of her work is based on. Dweck and her team, they tested 400 fifth graders by giving them an easy non-verbal IQ test. So it's a little bit like what we know as non-verbal reasoning tests or sheets. And then they then praised one group of pupils for their intelligence. So the teacher said, you must be really smart at this. And the other group was praised for their effort and were told, you must have worked really hard at this. The purpose, of course, was to see how this subtle difference of praising impacted on the pupils' performance and mindset. Following the first test, 2 options were given to the pupils for the next test. So first option was a harder test version of, a harder version of the test, but a great opportunity to grow and learn. And the second option was a similar version of the first test, an easy version, one they would be guaranteed to do well in. So out of the group praised for intelligence, 67% chose the easier option, whereas 92% of pupils who were praised for effort chose the harder test. distracting me a tiny bit. So this is a vast difference. Dweck explains this in terms of each group's mindset. The group that was praised for their intelligence entered into a fixed mindset of thinking that the adult praising them thought that they were very clever, and they were then not happy to risk that view being compromised by then trying a harder test and possibly not doing as well as in the first test, i.e. showing that they might not be that smart after all. The group that was praised for the effort they put into the work, on the other hand, were happier to go for the riskier option, for trying the harder test, as they had entered a growth mindset, a mindset that allowed them to explore and be adventurous. So as long as they tried their best and worked hard, they had nothing to lose. It's about the process of stretching themselves, of growth, a very different attitude provoked by subtle difference in how the pupils were praised. So next, they gave the pupils a test that was very difficult, one they would all struggle with. Dweck was interested to see how the different groups tackled this challenge. So she noticed that the group that was praised for intelligence became frustrated quickly and even seemed to enjoy the test. Then the last part of the study, the team gave easy as the first test. The outcome was very impressive. The group praised for their intelligence did worse in this test than they did in the first test, which with their average scores dropping by 20%, and the group praised for their effort did better in this test than in the first test, their average score being 30% higher than in the first test. So this is a 50% difference in their performance caused by a few subtle differences in how they were praised. So basically the message is, what we can basically conclude from this is, don't praise intelligence or abilities, but do praise process and effort. Next, I'm going to mention another person who's worked in this area, Noel Janice Norton, a learning and behavior specialist and founder, director of the New Learning Centre in London. And she makes a distinction between descriptive and evaluative forms of praise in her book, In Step with Your Class, Managing Behavior in an Inclusive Classroom. And she points to the problems that evaluative praise, such as well done, good boy, terrific, super, and so on, bring by pointing out that those very pupils who we are trying to reach with our praise are often the ones not likely to believe that they are super or have done well at something. Rather, they are more likely to think that we are exaggerating or don't really mean it, which according to Janice Norton is often the truth and can be counterproductive, as those pupils with challenges may be less trusting of us as a result. She then follows by sharing her views on descriptive praise and calls it, in her own words, the most powerful motivator and training tool I have ever come across. She describes it as a method by which you mention every small effort and behavior in the right direction, and you praise anything you are happy to see in great detail. Through descriptive praise, children and teenagers can improve a variety of aspects such as behavior, learning, and social skills. And here are some examples of what this could look like in more detail in relation to behavior. I do still have a question about it though, but I will come to that. So in terms of following instructions, she suggests that you should say things like, you followed the instructions without arguing. You must have listened very carefully because you completed the task without leaving anything out. Or in terms of following rules and routines, you remembered our rule to work in silence. Thank you for doing that, and so on. So you see several other examples there on the slide. So basically, she does not approve of evaluative praise. However, she does strongly recommend giving plenty of praise if it is descriptive. But the question for me is this really an okay way of talking to children or another human being, no matter whether it's a child or an adult? Well, I just maybe let you have a brief think, kind of how would you feel if somebody literally in such detail pointed out to you what you have done well? We are not obviously sort of in a workshop where we will now kind of break out into little groups or anything, but I think if we had the opportunity, lots of people would probably find it is quite manipulative, really. Hopefully there'll be a bit of time at the end where we can share this. I'm wondering whether it's healthy and letting the other be free. Am I asking this kind of behavior of the children for their own benefit or for my benefit as a teacher or parent? Does a classroom always have to be a silent space? Or if my child doesn't make a mess, is that important for the child or for me and my convenience? Just something to ponder on for the moment. Here a thought: if unconditional love and genuine enthusiasm are present, praise isn't necessary. If they are absent, praise won't help. So this is a quote by Kohn, the author of numerous acclaimed books. The title of each one gives a good idea of his outlook and frame of reference on the given topics. So these are some of the examples you can see here: punished by rewards, the trouble with gold stars, incentive plans, A's, praise, discipline from compliance to community, unconditional parenting, moving from rewards and punishment to love and reason, feel bad education, and so on. So, well, he's been described by the Time magazine as perhaps the country's, and they mean the USA, most outspoken critic of education's fixation on grades and test scores. And in this, he wrote a paper entitled 5 Reasons to Stop Saying Good Job, and he outlines his thoughts in a fairly concise way, so I'm going to share it with you. So he writes, he writes in a quite approachable manner, actually, not academics do. He says, hang out at a playground, visit a school, or show up at a child's birthday party, and there's one phrase you can count on hearing repeatedly: good job. Every tiny infant, even tiny infants, are praised for smacking their hands together, good clapping, or whatever else they might be doing. Many of us blurt out these judgments of our children to the point that it has become almost a verbal tic. This is what he calls it. He goes on to say that we might be advised to punish, or we might be advised not to punish or spank or isolate and so on, give time out. Sometimes we might be asked not to bribe children with stickers or food, but we are rarely discouraged from using what is euphemistically called positive reinforcement. He says it is of course important to support and encourage children, to love them, hug them, help them feel good about themselves. Praise, however, is a different story entirely. And here are his reasons why. So he says, first reason, praise can manipulate children. So getting children to comply with our wishes may have little to do with their emotional needs, but more with our sense of convenience. A 2-year-old, for example, eats without spilling the food, or a 5-year-old tidies away her toys, etc. So young children seek our approval, so it may seem the praise works, at least in the short term. But we have a responsibility not to exploit that dependence for our own benefits. Children or pupils may even feel manipulated by this, but might not be able to voice it. Number two, praise can create praise junkies. Not all praise is a calculated tactic to influence or control children's behavior. We might at times compliment children or pupils because we are truly pleased by what they have done. However, even then, the praise might have a different effect from what we expect. Rather than increasing the child's self-esteem, it may make children more dependent on us adults. So as we say, I like the way you sit or draw or speak or listen or whatever it might be, or as we say, good listening, good acting, good drawing. The more children come to rely on our judgments, our evaluations, our decisions about what is good or bad, rather than learning to form their own views and judgments. So it will lead them to consider their worth in terms of what will lead us to approve and smile at them. Mary Budrow is a researcher at University of Florida. She found that students who were praised elaborately by their teachers were more hesitant in the way they responded, often answering in a questioning tone of voice, sort of saying 12 when they were answering a math question, for example. So they were prone to retract from an idea they had shared as soon as an adult disagreed with them. They were also less inclined to persist with challenging tasks or share their ideas with other students. So a good job doesn't reassure children. In the end, it makes them feel less secure. The more we praise, the more they seem to need it, and consequently turning into adults who continue to crave others to tell them that what they did was great. And this might not really be what we want for children in our care. Number three is praise can steal a child's pleasure. So a child deserves to feel proud of their achievements and should be allowed to decide when to feel that way. However, every time we say good job, we're telling the child how to feel. Good job is an evaluation, just like bad job is too. It's a judgment. And people as well as children don't like to be judged. And suspending the judgment is more likely to lead to the child happily exclaiming, I did it, rather than hesitantly looking for the adult's approval and wondering, was it good, after they've done something for the first time, or when they've done something maybe better than before. And the fourth point is praise can cause children to lose interest. A comment or judgment such as good drawing might achieve that the child carries on with the activity as long as we are watching and praising. However, as soon as our attention shifts to something else, the child loses interest. Research has shown that the more we praise or reward people for something, the more they become interested only in the rewards rather than the activity they had to do in the first place. And the aim is no longer to paint or write or read or create. The aim becomes to be given a treat, whether it's be like a sweet, a star, a sticker, or a good job, as in a verbal praise. Generosity or being helpful becomes a means to an end rather than something valuable in its own right. This was also shown in a study by John Gruss at University of Toronto, in which young children were regularly praised for showing generosity. So are children motivated by praise? Yes, they are motivated to receive praise, however, often at the cost of dedication to whatever they were doing that caused the praise. Number 5 is praise can reduce achievement. Not only does praise or good job undermine independence, enjoyment, and interest, it has also shown to influence how well children actually do something. Children who are praised for doing well at a creative task often falter at the next task. They don't do as well as those children who were not praised. And not all compliments or thank yous and expressions of delight are harmful, but we need to consider our motives for what we say. Are our reactions helping the child to feel a sense of control over her life, or do they lead to them constantly looking to us for approval? Are they helping her to become more excited about what she's doing in its own right, or turning it into something she just wants to get through in order to receive a pat on the head? It's not a matter of memorizing a new script, but of keeping our long-term goals for our children or pupils in mind and watching for the effects of what we say. So you don't have to evaluate in order to encourage, is what Kohn says. In the title of this talk, it mentions impacts of praise on self-esteem and autonomy, as well as intrinsic motivation. So we'll have a bit of a closer look at that. So again, Alfie Kohn, he states in an interview with Ron Brandt in 1995 that punishments are destructive, and that both punishments and rewards are ways of manipulating behavior. He sees rewards as most harmful to interest when the task is already intrinsically motivating. And in the book Beyond Behaviors, Using Brain Science and Compassion to Understand and Solve Children's Behavior Challenges, Mona Delahook, and this was in 2019, so very recent, she points to the problems with rewards and punishments, in particular in relation to children who have experienced various forms of trauma. So rather than understanding that developmental trauma will lead to challenging behavior, she notes that professionals and educators often interpret children's challenging behavior as intentional and purposeful. She explains, as part of a case study, that the rewards and consequences paradigm does not take the level of injury a child might have experienced into account. Praising and rewarding might temporarily work to increase or decrease the specific behaviors. However, they didn't help the child to do what he or she most needed, which was to regulate their responses to stress. What is pointed out here seems very important to me and should not be ignored by anyone working with and being in charge of children. So what do we actually mean by intrinsic motivation? Deci defines it as the process of playing and learning, which children, but also adults, engage in. Being intrinsically motivated means being active, curious, and keen to engage with the environment, and in doing so, one learns. And children or adults who are playing and learning in this eager and willing way are intrinsically motivated. So being intrinsically motivated is equated with being in a healthy state, active, interested, and the intrinsically motivated behaviors that occur aid in gaining knowledge about oneself and the world. And Brophy, a bit longer ago, 1981, similarly states that children have an intrinsic desire to learn, and that pupils' natural inquisitiveness and natural wish to learn can be suppressed by ineffective praise, as their attention is distracted by extrinsic rewards rather than being able to experience the intrinsic reward that result from doing the activity or task itself. So as an example, you might have a boy quite happily mowing the lawn every Saturday, and then maybe one week dad decides that he would give him £1 each time he does it, and he actually stops enjoying doing it because suddenly the focus is more on getting paid. Now, some praise can result in blind conformity, a mechanical work style, or even open defiance. This is Hitz, 1989, citing Brophy, 1981. So teachers who encourage pupils, on the other hand, model an environment in which pupils can make mistakes and are encouraged to learn from them without having to fear constant judgments, and in which pupils don't have to continuously try to meet the teacher's expectation or standard of excellence. Children do best in encouraging environments where they get specific feedback and chances to assess their own work and behavior. Encouragement, according to Brophy, supports autonomy, openness to explore, positive self-esteem and acceptance of others and the self. A great deal of research has been carried out on the effects of praise and rewards on the intrinsic motivation of children. Each study has a different aim and different outcome, but most point out the negative effects, especially if the praise is given in unspecific, unhelpful ways. In order to acquire a clear picture, empirical knowledge of how giving praise and rewards impact on my pupils and their motivation, I then carried out a small-scale research project with my class, then class 7-8, in the autumn term of 2019. But I won't go into that now. I'll actually look a little bit more into what behavior. So it is a problem because even though it might work in a short term, you give pupils a certain consequence or threats or promises of a reward of some sort, but it's actually based on fear for consequences and the desire to earn rewards, which is rather actually a materialistic, economic, and one could say sort of, well, materialistic and egocentric, but also lacks teaching morality. It encourages compliance and obedience without initiative and creativity. It does not teach self-discipline or freedom with responsibility. It simply actually doesn't work, definitely not in the long run. The teacher needs to constantly make the rewards more appealing and the punishments more severe. Most class teachers, or any teachers really, can probably confirm this. By the time they reach class 4, the 1-2-3 system, introduced maybe a year earlier, has stopped working, or definitely has stopped working for pupils who misbehave the most. And what did Steiner say to all this? He said we need a deep understanding of each child. Our tools are things as meditation, observation, effort to get to know the children and their family circumstances. We form long-term relationships over several years, usually 8 years. Also knowing how to react to each child, which might be different depending on the sensitivity of the child or the temperament or constitution. He said we should believe in the intrinsic goodness of each child. It is very seldom that the child behave in a certain way because they have a difficulty or they need help. Discipline for us should be based on relationship. The response of the child to the teacher becomes one of a disciple, as in discipline, disciple. And we try to use an age-appropriate discipline. The concept of consequences is not naturally understood by a child before the age of 12. But in upper school, in Steiner schools anyway, we expect responsibility. It's very important that if you have to reprimand children or discipline them in some way, that you also show that you love them at the same time. And any technique that categorizes the children into good or bad is completely incompatible.